All right. It looks like we're live. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert, bringing a scalpel critical thought to Islam and Christianity, of course. And the question is, which one's true? With our guest today, Nuriyah Khan, who has a YouTube channel. I hope everybody goes and supports and subscribes. I'm even a member of it because I want true salvation. I know where heaven is. And you can go subscribe. She's doing all sorts of fun stuff when she has time. She's debated some of the Muslims that are out there that are defending Islam. I don't know. Have you debated any Christians? I don't think that's
I don't think so. Yeah, I haven't. Not my fight as much as it is yours, I guess.
Right, exactly. And then you did a recent interview with Seth Andrews that was actually really good.
I did, yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. For those who are curious to say, you hypocrite, you, Derek, you always poke at Christianity and you never take any critical scalpel to Islam. You don't do this to Islam. You're a Christophobe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have 19 videos for you to educate and remove yourself from that ignorance, understanding that I have actually had some of the world's leading critical scholars when it comes to Islam, and they're not polemicists. They are scholars, often from Harvard University and other institutions across the world, who know a thing or two about Islam, know how to read its sources in the original languages and such, from Syrian to Arabic, and you name it. So I hope that you will not cast judgment that is false on me before giving me a chance to listen to the things I actually present on MythVision, because we're trying to be fair. And you asked me before we went live, Nuriyah, do you have like some anger or some heated vendetta toward the Christian apologists? Because, man, they're quick to poke you in the eye and point out the flaws in Islam, but really don't recognize that much of the very critiques they make actually apply to Christianity. So, yes, there is a sense in which I want to call that out because I know Christianity quite well. And you know Islam, and you've learned a lot more about it, I'm sure, since leaving the bubble. Let me not hog the mic. I want to go where.
And from your channel as well, Derek, I had to say, I love your Islam content. There's not many people doing this in the way that you're doing, especially like in English, with that level of content getting out there with the academic backing. So absolutely amazing. We need more of this. But yeah, I'm excited to be back on MythVision. And yeah, even when you kind of said just the basis of this conversation, I was like, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And right. I think we'll both bring our own little elements and how much apologetics has pushed us to maybe even start our channel and do what we do, or just kind of, you know, try and put out information to counter all the misinformation out there, or what was once shrouded in mystery. So yeah, I'm excited. You kind of, I guess you take the lead and then we'll go wherever you want to go.
Okay. We'll start with my recent video on David Wood, where I point out almost everything he says when he's criticizing Islam in that particular video actually applies to Christianity and Judaism and the earlier Phoenician Canaanite cultures. It almost applies to every religion. Oftentimes, almost all of the points he brings up are ubiquitous in human religion, because religion, I think, is an evolution, a construct that humans have evolved to naturally come to. I don't think that they were like, you know, some people talk about hell, right? People invented hell just to control humans. I think maybe that's happened obviously throughout history where they have utilized it, but I think naturally people have drawn these ideas up completely normal and natural. They saw gas coming out of the earth. They imagined the underworld. They've already had constructions of the ideas of underworlds being a place people go, people going to heaven, ascending to heaven, all the way back in Mesopotamia with Adapa. And there's Egyptian mythologies as well that go into this. My point is I just saw it and I was like, this is an interesting video, because I know that he's being condescending towards Islam. Muslims love rocks. You know, look at the comment section. Christians are like, Muslims love rocks, the Kaaba. And it's like, dude, do you not know about the Holy Sepulchre? Do you not know about the standing stones in ancient Israel, or even the foundation stones to the temple in Jerusalem that were significant in Judaism. It seems like, I said it before the stream, I'm going to use a different example because I don't want to get people, someone tries to point fingers at me, say that's not politically correct or something. But it's like someone who is pointing the finger and everything applies to them as well. And they just can't see it. And that's what I'm trying to point out when I critiqued that video. I'm not even disagreeing with the things that David Wood may have said about Islam in that case.
Yeah, because as you said, as David Wood is brilliant in his critique against Islam, especially like when it comes to, bringing these kind of even obscure elements of it really much to the forefront, and then the tone he uses, it's appealing, but completely, like as you said, if you were to take those same line of arguments or that same reasoning and you were to apply it onto your own worldview, obviously it's going to get really problematic. And as you said rightly, like this is why I think the beauty of your channel anyway, and what like I tried to do in my teeny tiny way when I realized that Islam wasn't true, was to kind of see, okay, where did this come from and how did this get to where we are today, and what did it build on? And then it just becomes this insanely interesting tapestry of history that just unfolds before your eyes, right? And you can see the overlap, and just like in your response video, it was perfectly articulated how most holy sites remain holy. And even if you look back to the Muslim, like let's say they're worshipping of a rock, essentially, whether you consider the circumambulation of the Kaaba, essentially worshipping a rock, and then the black rock that's in there that was once white. But if you look into the hadiths as well, they're talking about worshipping stones and rocks as something that was done pre-Islamically anyway. And they literally even like would joke around saying, oh, if we didn't used to do this, we still, we'd think, what are we doing? But we saw the Prophet doing this before. And it was very much seeped into the general like religious psyche at the time, if you will. And that's what the entire Kaaba's foundation was. But no, you're right. And the only thing I would say is, I think it's weird to me that also like somebody is, really kind of trying to do ministry or trying to, I guess, make people come to their understanding of what religion is or come back to Christ or what have you. Because I think in David Wood's case, and I'm not here to like literally psychoanalyze anyone, that's not what I'm doing, but it's just interesting because it's like the reasons why some people turn to religion. And I guess if you take everybody's personal circumstances into account, for some reason, I personally don't think that David Wood was too bothered about the veracity of the claims potentially at the time that he accepted Jesus, or even now afterwards, because it was almost that like road to Damascus moment, or that feeling. And Derek, you felt it once upon a time. I felt it once upon a time. Like David saw me, everybody's had that. And I think something neurologically just switches off at that point, when you're, and then your defenses go up because that's the worldview you've got to protect.
I think that, and this is psychoanalyzing David a bit, I would be more than happy to have conversations with him. The internet is fueled by tribalistic and certain motifs of, you need to debate. I'm not a debater. I'm a conversator. I want to have an honest, good conversation with people. And I wouldn't mind dissecting the discussion with David about his journey. And it'd be an interesting conversation, because I imagine if you actually hammered your dad in the head, and the way that he described his conversion going down into the subway, I was shocked to see the reception of many Christians seeing that interview, that video, that Plato's cave analogy of a conversion, and not getting like, hold on, I need to pause. The things he said in this video were so extreme. Like, this isn't, I was struggling with drug addiction, or someone's doing something that, is almost like taboo, but like, I want to peel people's skin off. This is like Jeffrey Dahmer sounding stuff that he was describing in his conversion. And I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, this is insane. And like, if that experience that he had in prison based on Christianity is what he's hinging his whole, this is what's true, then my definition up front on what I was saying in the title by saying which one's true, Islam or Christianity, wouldn't apply to this. Because what I'm trying to say is, what is true? What conforms to reality? What are the facts? What is the reality about these religions? I would say they're man-made, and that human experience is where he would probably play into his kind of change that he claims Christianity did to him that caused him to go down the path he's going down. I want to say up front, for those who are possibly David Wood fans and stuff, I really enjoy and get a laugh out of many of his critical videos toward Islam. And I've spoken to several critical scholars who aren't fans of polemicism and the kind of hatred that goes so far that people would maybe even label it Islamophobic, things like that. But they do say that he handles his sources in English quite well when he's being critical of Islam. Not always, they said, not every time he's accurate on the way that he's assessing the material, but he does a damn good job. And these are people who aren't Christian, who are atheists, that are critical scholars that I talk to in Islam. And so he does a good job there. But when I see that he doesn't apply the critical source criticism to the Bible, to the New Testament, I can't help but wonder why. And I want to point that out. So then I could imagine a conversation, Nuriyah, you tell me, between me and him, where he would go, okay, sure, let's just grant all of this. Which one's worse? Which one pragmatically in the world is a worse religion? And then I can imagine it going down that kind of path to avoid pointing out the flaws that he literally is critiquing Islam about. And I could show that all of that applies to the Bible and his worldview. But
yeah, no, exactly. And I think there is also an element, I think he did a podcast with Horace Sultan, and they went into a little bit of his time in jail, and then him kind of, coming towards Christianity. And it was brought up whether, he needed Christianity to keep him grounded, if you will. And he doesn't even shy away from the fact that, that might be the case entirely. And then I think Matt Dillahunty's even said, if you need Christianity for that, then by all means keep it. Like, I'm happy that you're Christian. And it's honestly the same thing for, again, a lot of Muslims who say that there's the concept of morality and the concept of this expanding universe and us just here on a tiny blue dot, arguably for no real reason, is too much to bear. And that thought of kind of just, I guess, that existential crisis is too much. And then you want to latch on to something which gives you hope. So I think in the words of David, he said that within jail, being a Christian, then I could still control my own mind and my own thoughts, and any punishment that was meted out at me wouldn't really affect me, because I guess you strengthened your resolve in so many other ways. And so then I ask you, Derek, how much would truth, or the concept of truth, come into such a situation?
Right. Nothing. I don't know if real reason and real truth would be something that would help resolve in that, because I think what makes Christianity so pragmatic, it has a utility. If we look at it from its origins, you're dealing with a slave society that do not control the scene. You have a figure who's a peasant nobody, who comes from a nowhere, who legitimately usurps the Roman Caesar, and the authors who wrote about him, including Paul, apply all of the attributes of a deity. I'm not saying he's God, the Trinitarian view. I think that's anachronistic on Christians' parts to assume this theology we call Trinitarianism is what the Bible's teaching. No, I think he is another deity. He has a father who's ultimately God the Father, but he is a God. Now, I know the hyper monotheist will come out and go, there's no other God. They got to find to reconcile this cognitive dissonance. But I guess what I'm getting at is the idea of suffering that we find. I gave an analogy to a friend of mine this morning when we were talking about this, because one of her friends wrote on Twitter or Instagram something about, let me read it to you actually, because it applies to the very thing you're saying. And then this dives into why I think not only Islam, but Christianity, there's a common theme and thread that runs through both that worked for someone like in prison, as an example. She said, I saw a Christian quote my friend shared on Instagram today, and it really struck me, was like, better to be in pain in God's plan than to be in comfort without him. She was like, what the So the moral is, it's better to be in pain as long as you can align it to God than to be not in pain. So I don't think that's the point. I think they're saying, you're suffering. Life's difficult. Life's tough. Here is David Wood in prison. He's struggling. And I broke down the whole concept of a woman who's been captured by a predator, men that have like literally trapped them in their house. We find them 15 years later, 3 kids later. They're sexually abused this entire time in this relationship. They have no control. They are stuck and trapped in a completely hopeless scenario. Well, how do you find resolve? How do you find peace? How can I live with this? You make your weakness your strength. You make, I am weak, therefore I'm strong. You make in your mind a psychological way in which you can be the stronger one, because slap me on the other cheek, beat me to a pulp. And when you read Irenaeus and church fathers who are writing to the Romans saying, I want to die. This flesh is nothing. If I love this life, then I will not gain the one to come. It is this kind of psychological slave mentality, and prison is another form of slavery in many ways. I understand it has absolute utility for certain reasons, but in many cases, there's a lot of human rights issues. There's a lot of problems that go on in this. And imagine being trapped in prison. This philosophy works really good for someone who has no power. So you see this reversal of the Roman imperial cult in the Christ movement right there in the New Testament. Jesus gets the titles of Caesar Augustus. Jesus gets everything that you see the Caesars and the other deities that are all floating around the Roman Empire. They apply to Jesus. Jesus just so happens to turn water into wine, just like Dionysus. The list can go on. And so they have found a way to make their weakness their strength. And whoever penned these things did a damn good job, I think. Anyway, sorry for rambling, but that's
no, not at all. Yeah, no, and again, because it's very similar to how Islam preys on criminals as well, like who are incarcerated. And it's that same, that like with Christianity, it's a lot more of this kind of servile, master servitude, like psyche. And I guess it is an extension of, you know, even during the Roman Empire and stuff, when like people, you know, understanding that stoicism, if everything is so bleak externally, then at least we have some control and some mastery over our mind, and therefore you should learn to be as stoic as you can. And then Christianity as well comes in like really turns that even like darker, as in my flesh is worthless and I just give myself over to Christ, and you know that's the ultimate way of getting salvation, and you're living for something else. You're trying to get to the pearly gates of heaven as opposed to better your situation around you or things like that. So yeah, that relationship creeps, and I think Christopher Hitchens really talks about it beautifully when it's like that slave master relationship. You know, if I don't have a master, whose slave will I be? That creeps into it. But then also vulnerable, like people who are in some kind of either really bleak situation in life, or vulnerable, or as you're saying, like Derek, been abused, or, you know, suffering from all kinds of conditions. These kind of like ideologies, or let's call them philosophies to give them that extension for argument's sake.
They are philosophies.
Yeah, they are. Essentially, yeah, and they have been very successful. Again, I have to salute whoever has even done what they did to Islam and made it this really cemented, like one solution fits all package. This will solve all of your problems in the world. Mm-hmm. It has every answer for every problem in life you would ever encounter, and it will ground you and control you to the point that, you know, essentially you're just pretty much a robot doing the exact same thing 5 times a day, every day. Until you die.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like Christianity does the same. It has all the answers that you need. Yeah. It solves all the problems. But what you said there is interesting. Both have common threads, but maybe by the 7th century, you're dealing with a religion that at its birth is an empire kind of religion that it seems was in more of a colonial kind of conquest kind of system at the outset. Whereas I think Christianity very quickly became political in a different way. once you start seeing it become Romanized or in a political power. I mean, the political religion of Rome in 300-400 years later. But even earlier, you find it trying to usurp the system in which it's being birthed from. And I understand, like, if someone like David needs this religion to not murder people, as it seems Matt Dillahunty said, he said, you know, keep that religion for yourself. I just want viewers to know the facts as much as possible, because I feel like there's a sense in which we can psych ourselves out and tell ourselves a myth if we need to make us feel better. Best friend of mine overdosed on fentanyl. His sister called me the day after crying like uncontrollably and just said he was too good for this world. God took him because he was too good for this world. And he knew that if he stayed, she made this whole like thing up in her head. She said, if God kept him here, he'd have suffered more and had a struggling life, but God knew he was too good and he needed to take him now. And what did I say? Actually, no, I think that's not true. No, I just went, you're right. God did take him from this world. I went with the myth. I went with what was best to her situation at the time. But I think in an educational setting, when you are constantly pointing the finger at other religions and not taking the time to listen to the Muslims themselves who have had a similar experience, maybe they haven't hammered their dad in the head, but they've legit had a conversion experience that Islam solved and gave them that filling the black hole within themselves experience. You see what I'm saying? Like, their religion's just as valid based on this perception as Christianity or any other religion that gives that satisfaction and fulfills those existential needs.
Yeah, and I don't know how it was for you, Derek, but obviously, I mean, I'm grateful you didn't consider Islam once you deconverted. But you know what? Like, for me, for a Muslim, genuinely, it is like an afterthought. When you've left Islam, you're like, oh wait, what about the other two where we supposedly come from? Because it's an extension by Islamic theology, right? So for me, when Islam went, I think because I'd also like started listening to the Four Horsemen, and then I listened to a lot of Hitchens and Richard Dawkins debate, but usually they were debating against Christians. Mm-hmm. But I was just watching it, obviously, because I'd not even been exposed to that kind of material growing up in the Middle East. And all the time they were talking about Christianity, I was basically, in my head, I was just compensating it for Islam or like Islamic concepts. And I was just like, they are schooling the apologists here. And I was shocked that it wasn't even like I had to, unpack all of Islam to kind of realize that this is now I don't need to turn to any, I refuse to turn to any other religion just straight off the cuff, because for me with Islam, as soon as that, and it's wrong because I went with the Islamic way of thinking that they're all connected, but I was like, I've still got the same questions there about, how the world began, how old the earth is, the shape of the earth, just the things like that, they all apply still. And whichever Abrahamic lens you look at it from, the same arguments can apply. And the only, I guess, privilege I would give to Islam, again, in the words of Hitchens, he amazingly, when he said, this really hit home for me I was on my journey out, and he said, Islam makes really, really big claims for itself. And it's so bad, but you always did feel like a sense of superiority, oh, even Christians and the Jews, they corrupted their books, they got it wrong, but ours was preserved, it was a final message. And you feel this kind of, it's messed up, but you feel that. And, so once I left, I was like, okay, I should technically look into those. But when Islam said we're the final message and the Quran is the word of God, when one thing goes wrong in Islam, Derek, it's all gone. Because if there's a single letter off in the Quran or a single morally reprehensible thing in the Quran, that's verbatim from God. At least as a Christian, I would probably stay in the fold a bit longer and say, oh, well, that could be, it's just the inspired word of God. So maybe this writer got it wrong in that time or place. Whereas Islam, you can't offer that leniency to.
Right. So I want to poke into your mind and your experience as well, because it's a curious case to watch ex-Muslim not become a Christian, because typically Christian apologists are on the forefront engaging Islam online way more than you see other secular humanist and things like that are usually not as often engaging. They're out there. It's just not as common as you see Christian apologists. And I think that's this brother combat that goes on because they're so close and similar, but also different. And there's this like grinding of ideologies. Plus, I think there's a huge threat with Islam growing and Christianity being the number one religion. They got to try to stop that, because where's our argument going to be? We have the most people who are Christian in the world. Well, when that changes, that argument is going to be BS, because now we've got the most Muslims in the world. Now it'll just switch to, well, yeah, they're just having more babies, and so they're coercive. They're going to come up with some excuse for those who use these arguments. In your thinking, though, I'm curious to know, you're saying that Islam is easier to falsify if you can show there's something that doesn't fit the narrative in that particular type of thinking, whatever version of Islam we're dealing with. And if the Muslim can see that, almost like a domino or a Jenga effect, you pull it, the whole tower comes down. Whereas Christians have so many rabbit holes and loopholes and exit, areas to try and get out of these tough pickles. They've kind of found a way to make Christianity still work, even if evolution's true, and still work if Adam and Eve are myth and Abraham's myth. Still true if Jonah didn't get swallowed by a whale. Still true even if there's legends in the New Testament. Still true even if Jesus wasn't really born of a virgin. I mean, where do you draw the line, right? But they find ways to deal with these things. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%, because you can offer Christianity, I feel like, has a little bit more leeway and room to play with. So you can push the boundaries a bit more. Whereas in Islam, if you seriously got a problem with the Quran, you've basically got a problem with Allah directly. Like, it's like one-on-one beef. There's no middleman, there's no inspired writing, it's not that kind of equation. But Derek, to your point, I also wanted to say there are a lot of ex-Muslims that do convert to Christianity, and my take on this as well is this is where Christian, ministry and kind of like polemics do get a bit dangerous, is because I feel like a large portion of those Christian preachers, if you will, they are waiting or like almost ready to pounce on if somebody has just kind of got knocked off their belief or their faith in Islam because of this brotherly, cousinly, whatever you want to call it, this connection. There's a lot of ex-Muslims, I still come across them, who they are ex-Muslim, but they're not willing to shake their faith in God. They're still not willing to shake their fear of hell. They're not willing to accept that, I guess at least the atheistic or even the agnostic position of why we're here and how the world came about. That's just too nihilistic for them. Right. So again, then they find comfort in, okay, well, Muhammad said some bad things, or the Hadith say some really screwed up things, and I don't agree with the Quran, but I still get to hold on to like some of my favorite prophets and some of my favorite stories, and actually they sound better coming from the Bible. So anything that sounded a bit more like aggressive and, like just too intense from the Islamic side, the Bible seems to be that little softer cushion pad to land on, if you will. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it, because when I was Christian, I thought the same thing. And when there were horrific acts or deeds, you could say God was justified in doing some of these things and find a way to justify it. Like what we just saw recently on Alex O'Connor's channel with the justification of the Canaanite slaughter in the Bible by William Lane Craig. Like, he literally finds a way to... God waited, kept them in Egypt in slavery, by the way, his own people, for 400 years, so that the Canaanites could fill up their sin. Once they've done enough sin, some of this sin is bestiality, some of the sin is child sacrifice, the list goes on and on. Then the Israelites are justified in completely eradicating every man, woman, and child. And he goes on record saying this is just. He's trying to defend this. I just think that the same, if you find horrific things in Islam that look bad, eradicating a Jewish village or raping women or whatever, like, you can find these ideas in the biblical text.
Oh yeah. Like Muslims would give arguments for what, like, the genocide of Banu Qurayza, like an entire Jewish tribe, and they would say, oh yeah, but they broke the treaty, and they'll completely justify reasons why, and then you can push them further and say, well, do you think every boy of adolescence, or like that's hit puberty, they were checking for pubic hair, and if they had any, then they would be killed? And it's like, again, they would find a justification for that as well. Or they would grow up and build an army against Muhammad or whatever. But yeah, it's the exact same thing. And I don't know, maybe it's, I guess, once you've left a religion that, like, I believed in it wholeheartedly, and you did as well, Derek. But for me, my ears already on high alert, whether I hear it coming from a Christian or a rabbi or an Islamic scholar, my ears are on high alert for the same, that they're playing the same things. It's got the same circular logic. Why is it true? Because the Quran says so, because the Bible says so. Historical architecture, artifacts, everything, the timelines all work against you. But no, that book says it is. And then when the apologists are going at each other, does seem a bit like of a, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings situation at times. So not to be reductionist, but I mean, it's when I'm in debates and I'm in those situations with theists or whatever, and then they start a rebuttal with another theistic point, I say that's not my point to argue at all, mate. Like,
so your personal experience, you were fully in believing the whole nine. You didn't have a moment when you were starting to doubt Islam that maybe I should go to Christianity, or you probably did, but you stayed in your critical thinking and then realized, like, actually, it sounds a lot like what I'm already dealing with. It's just got its own problems. It's just a different story or a different book that has different context. What happened to you in your thinking there? Because my deconversion, I didn't go toward Islam. I went toward like more of like a universalist in a way in my thinking, that God may be trying to reveal itself through all the religions in some way. That's why there's so much overlap and commonality among them all. And it was like a slow 2 to 3 year, maybe 4 year deconversion where I gradually started coming more toward a scientific and naturalist worldview that made more sense of what I'm seeing on an everyday basis and stuff, trying to think that way. What was yours like?
Oh, I'm glad Islam didn't entice you, Derek. Or we would not be sitting here having this conversation today. It'd be a very different world. Can you imagine? You might be sitting with like the hijabs and the dawas of YouTube.
Can you cover your face while I speak to you, please?
Oh my God, that just scared me for a second. I was like, has he been possessed?
You need to put on a hijab. No, I'm just... I've seen like some Muslim apologists, by the way, blur, like Candace, whatever her name is, this recent drama going on with all that.
Candace Owens, yeah.
They blur her cleavage section when they show a clip from her, and I'm like, what is, like, it makes me want to look more at the blur now that it's there. It's like you're making me want to look at your, anyway.
They don't know that that's just making it even worse for them, but yeah. So no, for Derek, yours is interesting because it was like it seems like it was a little bit more of a slow burn. I will say though, just as a disclaimer, any religion after Islam seems like a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Like, I've got some breathing space in this. So, as soon as I had that flash moment where I was like, no, I've seen enough now. I can't stay in this religion. Literally, Derek, the next thought was like, wait, what about Christianity and Judaism then? Are they also wrong? And it just went like, they just fell like dominoes. I was like, Adam and Eve, I can't do this. I can't. And I had also like really looked into how, hells were so different and like related to whichever like society or community you're looking at. So like, the Norse gods in Nordic like mythology, their hells are like frozen over, and the Islamic hell conversely is like boiling. And I, like, as Christian Prince says, he goes like, you're gonna be burnt like a shish kebab over and over again. And it's true. And I was like, look, it's just what people's worst nightmare is, to be endlessly surrounded with. And Yeah, so I guess that I was told a lot of misinformation about Christianity as well. I didn't know much except for the really lovely parts of it, which I still really enjoy. I think I'm more culturally Christian than I'm culturally Muslim because, I love the Christmas carols, the mass. I used to do that in school here. So I got all of the lovely aspects, and I always thought, oh, they can at least be merry and drink and they sing. In Islam, it's like, oh, you get a bit of money on Eid, and, you got to sacrifice a goat, and that's our joy. It didn't make sense to me. But yeah, they fell like dominoes. I never dabbled. I'm grateful as well. I never kind of needed to hold on to even a belief in God enough, or needed to be in kind of a close neighborhood where I could still have the same characters, the same mythology, and the same story to a certain degree. I just wanted to like get rid of all the white noise.
I totally get it. Thank you for those super chats. Holy smokes. I just saw a $50 one. We will get to your super chats here at the end. Please forgive me. I don't want to interrupt the conversation here with Nuriyah because there's so many good things to cover. So to be fair, I think it's important, if we're going to be consistent, which one's more harmful in today's society as far as we can tell. And we can see some of the harms, maybe even politically in the US, with restricting women's rights in many ways, patriarchal elements that are still left over from much of the Abrahamic traditions. As far as Islam goes, though, I jumped on Ex-Muslim Apostate Aladdin's YouTube channel the other day because I was like, hold up, some comment was made by one of the apologists in India, a Muslim apologist. There was a woman who was completely covered describing how her husband married another woman and then neglected her. And the entire time, the Muslim apologist berated her in front of everybody, pretty much silencing her and justifying and saying, you could go to hell for even criticizing your husband publicly. Like it was so, the way I told Apostate Aladdin was that there are probably churches in America, small country, located probably in complete rural areas that aren't, the popular churches that make it in America that have a lot of attention. But there's probably some really backward ideas that float around in some Christian churches. However, it seems Christianity's met modernity earlier and is forced to reckon with secular Enlightenment ideas and try to co-opt them and act like they're the ones who brought those ideas, etc., rather than realizing that what happened in Christianity is an internal change. This is why I want reform, and I want Muslims to gradually leave this literalist, strict interpretation. It was Christians first in the Protestant Reformation who critiqued the Catholic miracle stories. Then they turned that scalpel, that critical thinking, onto their own Bibles. So it wasn't atheist and agnostics and you secular Nuriyah, it was you that did this. No. Christians themselves did this in their own traditions. And then eventually we see enlightenment and we start to see what values come forward from that point onward. It looks like Islam's a little bit behind in those things. I may be wrong, but tell me your thoughts as an ex-Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, so my understanding was especially like in the UK and like Europe in general, it is definitely, again, just because it's the youngest religion as well, and we'll give it to them, it is the fastest growing according to birth rates. But exactly what you said, this kind of head-on encounter with modernity, if you will, or like a renaissance or enlightenment values or rationality. Like even Judaism had its own enlightenment period, and I've actually read into it. I forgot the name of it. It's a specific name, but obviously that happened a very, very long time ago. Right. And then we see the same thing happen to Christianity, and it's been watered down. And then obviously, you've kind of got the fundamentalists in America, and that's why I actually want to ask you as well. I really want to get your opinion on how dangerous is Christianity, because maybe I'm undermining, let's say, what could happen when people are actually, wanting the end of days to come, and they think that Trump and guns and the end times, these things go hand in hand. So, I mean, those things together they're scary ingredients. And then, like you said, Roe v. Wade, to my British mind, that was crazy that could even happen in this day and age. I've never had to even confront something like that from a legal perspective in the UK. It's just always been a fundamental right here. Anyway, as far as I was as far as I've grown up anyway. So yeah, the fact that that can happen at the drop of a hat almost, and things can be reversed, things that have been fought so hard for, that's kind of where I'd like you to let me know your thoughts. But when it comes to Islam, I think definitely, because, as you're saying, Derek, the literalist interpretation is so readily there for the taking because it's in the Quran. And this is where I struggle with Islam reforming, is because there is always going to be a fringe element of people who will say, but to me, this book says this, and this is how we've been interpreting it for 1400 years. This is exactly the way the Prophet lived it in his lifetime. And when we're supposed to emulate his example, why the hell can we change it now? And I don't think you would ever get the Islamic Ummah to agree on changing. How can you even, Derek, if you think about how could you even go about changing the word of God? Because then the claims that Islam makes for itself, therefore God is fallible. And then everything Islam holds to be true is gone because you've questioned Allah. But for me, it is the absolute political Islam that it's so easily taken off the pages of the Quran, interpreted from the Hadiths. You just Google the top terrorist organizations based on size and casualties they've caused with a strict religious purpose or affiliation. They are all Islamic, and they can argue amongst themselves that they're not and they don't represent it, and you can argue they're no true Scotsman till the cows come home. But that's why I think when we look at the world today and you look at what's happening, and I'm whether you talk about terrorist attacks or the treatment of women or child marriages or honor killings, issues with FGM, this is all happening because Islam has not had that brush with modernity in the way that it has. It's almost just it's constantly just being pushed back a bit, and it just keeps worming its way in through various means. There's so many forms of jihad, but yeah, I don't want to ramble, so I'll let you come back.
I actually want you to ramble because you have so much insight in a different world that I'm not familiar with on that level. My perception, just to make one quick comment, and I'd love to have you keep elaborating, is I'm just going to say it like I think it is based on what I've observed. Islam overall, worldwide, in current times, okay, we're not talking about history because we can go and find some dirt, real bad dirt on the conquest of Christianity in South America, really throughout the world, that we would call jihad. We would consider this extremism 101, and it would look like the Taliban, okay? And you can find these examples of how extreme Christianity has been. But I have to admit, right now, I think you have almost like a ticking time bomb, potential fundamentalist Christian nationalist kind of ideas in America. Overall, it looks like Islam, though, with these extremists and the deaths and the terrorism that does come up, looks like it is worse in this respect. But you do have guys on YouTube, and they're typically white guys, making these comments about women shouldn't vote. I've even heard some of them go so far as to say only house owners. That means initially this is why you didn't have women nor blacks voting in America. They kind of want to go backwards in time and take away a lot of the rights and the freedoms that we see. Women have one sole purpose. It's to repopulate. It's to produce your child. And you hear that in Islam as well. So they serve this kind of, I need a baby making machine utility. These are more of extreme Christian nationalist Christian ideas in America. Whereas in the UK, I don't know, there might be some really small cult groups here and there, but overall Christianity's watered down, tamed, and actually just a cultural thing where let's go enjoy Christmas. I love the idea of the bells and the Santa Claus and the Christmas tree, and Jesus was born and there's the manger. That's all pretty and fun. I like it. I love Christmas time. I love celebrating Easter. I love all this stuff. So yeah, it looks like that is bad. But how do we get Muslims to see that the Quran is loaded with myth and legend how do we do that? Because I talked to Javad Hashmi, which you've heard and know, Harvard University. He's a devout Muslim. And he says, I've been speaking in the, what are they called? Not synagogue, but the mosques. And he's been teaching about myth in the Quran. And he's been teaching that. And I'm like, now this is in America. But what if we could get Muslims to start recognizing that their tradition is legend and myth as well? They have a lot of myth and legend stories in theirs, and it's not what literally happened. That would be a great progress. But anyway.
That would be. I mean, I would wish for that to happen. And you know what, Derek? The thing is, there are bits of that, like staring them in the face. If you read the Quran, like the issue with the satanic verses, for example, you have to confront that, like, oh my God, like that happened, and Muhammad mistook, God's words for the devil's words. But also, what was he talking about? He was alluding to 3 pagan goddesses. And then there's obviously that relates to, the pagan religion at the time, but then they try and say, oh, that's just like mythology. So wherever they want to apply mythology to obviously keep Islam from that scrutiny, they're happy to apply it. Like, for example, in America, there's a church that opened, I believe it might have been Houston, but I could be wrong. It's an LGBT like friendly church, mosque. And I was like, how? And then when we have the exact same story of Prophet Lot, Hazrat Lut in Arabic, and the story of what happened to his people, and yet they're trying to say, oh no, that I don't know how you can, again, cognitive dissonance or rationalize it, but they still think that even with that in the Quran, and then with all the prohibitions against it and the punishments in Sharia, they still would open a mosque and say you're all welcome. And don't get me wrong, I'm no one, like, if that's the way Islam needs to progress and those are the avenues it needs to take, sure. If you were actually willing to, let's say, rationally dismiss what the theology, the theological basis is, then sure, we can have, I mean, there's kind of like the situation for queers for Palestine, but it's that level of, I'm ignoring this chunk of all of this data, all of the corpus of the actual text. But that's the only way I can see it happening, really, is if people choose to accept what's there and still go against it. Because otherwise, for me, I can't see a push where Islam has tried to cement itself in this way. And that's why, again, you're always going to get fundamentalism happening in the backdrop, because just how fundamental Christians are looking for, to bring on the end times, Muslims have those hadiths that say, there is going to be a final battle and it will be between the Muslims and the Jews, and that there is going to be a second coming, and you have to follow, Christ, and you have to figure out who the Antichrist is and all of this stuff. But they are so hell-bent on this. Again, it's the same thing with Christianity. This is why I can't stand any of these religions, is because that promise of this afterlife, and I think we can touch on this a bit more if you want, but this kind of like succumbing this life up for just Islam is even like so bad in the sense of how much it deprives someone in this life, especially like, the basic pleasures, Derek, like basic desires, like generally like part of the human experience. I shouldn't even laugh about it because there's such integral human experience. Like, it should be a diverse experience, and Islam says to have this really unnatural, almost like a tiger locked up in a cage constantly, but yet you're on the other side of the cage, you're seeing like this heaven of absolutely everything you could ever imagine. So for me, I struggle with Reformation. I know we have people like Javad Hashmi, we have people who call themselves progressive scholars or modernist scholars, Imam Tawhidi, the Imam of Peace. I appreciate the sentiments and what they're doing. I just don't know how fruitful it will be.
That's very interesting. It makes me think that interpretation, the meaning of things change over time. People are able to look past them. I've seen some of the more moderate Quran onlyist type Muslims online try to say, there's no beating of the wife. I can't even remember their names, but like there's people who are trying to argue that the Quran doesn't teach you can beat your wife, where they're trying to get those ugly things out and say, hey, we need to interpret this in a whole new light. And I feel like what part of my deconversion, and I wonder if we could almost take a single person's experience and just multiply it on a grand scale for the overall religion itself. There's probably faults in this comparison, but I feel like when you have this overflow of various interpretations and ideas as potential answers to what the meaning of things might be, that starts to create a doubt and lowers the confidence in how dogmatic I should be about what this text actually says or means. And it defangs that staunch literalism if you're willing to go down that path. And that's what happened to me. When my bubble popped, I didn't become an atheist overnight. I went and said, hold on, there's maybe a deeper meaning behind this. Maybe there's something else going on in the story that I'm reading. And I started opening up to myth and legend, still a theist and still believe in God and pray and the whole nine. But I had a new way of kind of trying to understand these things. So I'd like to see that happen with Islam, but the way you're describing it as someone who's been through it, especially as a female, it's just horrific. Like really, really bad. And it makes me think Christianity is ahead in that regard toward women overall.
I think Christianity's had a bit more of like, obviously it's had a bit more time to calm down. Like you said, if we go back a couple of 100 years, right, we can pinpoint some serious atrocities. And again, you would arguably think that at that time we've got to deal with, this insurrection by Christianity, or what they're, making women go through, or what they're doing to society overall, or how they're just, suppressing whatever progress humanity is trying to make for various reasons, and all the violence and terror or whatever. And you can argue that it had some peaceful elements. Of course it did, in the same way that you could argue some Islamic elements have come out and tried to be a lot more peaceful in their approach. Some would argue Sufis are a lot more esoteric, and they're not looking for these literalist interpretations. They're very much happy, almost like taking that monarchistic approach to connecting with God, if you will. But again, when it comes to like the hold that this religion has, when you said, I agree with you completely, if something is open to so many interpretations, I used to think this as a child as well, how, especially again, the claim Islam makes that Allah says the Quran is the clear book of guidance for you. And I'm like, if it's a clear book of guidance, why are there no two Muslims that can agree with each other? It made no sense. And you're right, it did water it down, because as a child, when I lived in Saudi, and I would hear about beheadings and, see the Islamic police with batons and being really aggressive. And I would ask my parents for answers, because I didn't think that's what a God would, be enforcing like that totalitarianly on earth. And my parents just said, that's Saudi Islam, that's not us. And again, we're differentiating. That's Wahhabi Islam. We don't follow that. Who are we then? Oh, we're just some Sunni. Well, what sect of Sunni? Just the one that's, she's all right with it.
Right, Sunni. Yeah.
Right, Sunni. Yeah, you're right.
That is so funny. Yeah, that's what my process was like when you realize how many denominations and how many theological points and Christians arguing for centuries, free will or predestination. There's so many different ideas, and how serious some of the proponents of those views say, if you think you achieved salvation at all, then you're not really saved, because it's monergistic, and there's terms and theological ideas that they would use to describe it and all. And the other side saying, no, you're making God this dictator and evil and the author of evil, and therefore you're actually worshiping a demon and not really worshiping a God. And so Christians are saying Christians aren't Christians. And you find this over and over in Christianity, which again, we find in Islam. I mean, but what would these apologists, if I'm criticizing Christian apologists who are pointing the finger at Islam, I'm not saying you're not right about pointing a finger at Islam. I'm not even saying that what you might be saying about Islam isn't true. I'm just saying it's a blind spot like hell when I see it happening in Islam and Christianity. But the one thing they'll do is they'll go, yeah, but the difference is our guy, Jesus, versus the Muslim guy, Muhammad, and their character. And so that's also, by the way, if you enter the critical scholarly realm, that also is up for debate on exactly what Jesus was, who he was. it sounds like we have better sources to depict Muhammad. It sounds like. I know they're hundreds of years later, but you get elements of it. He was probably a warlord, apocalypticist, maybe at some point in his ministry. I'll call it a ministry. And his conquest of bringing in this new religion, which eventually became its own empire and religious kind of empire that goes and moves into the world and has a massive conquest, second to the Mongolians in history. But with Jesus, he probably was, again, another false prophet who made apocalyptic claims, a revolutionary person who was probably extreme in his rhetoric of God coming in and destroying the empire that was probably at the time and critiquing other Jews in their particular versions of Judaism, which we see elements of in the Gospels over and over about them misunderstanding or taking things too far. Can we work on the Sabbath? All we're doing is picking food. Like, what are you talking about? We're not working. David did it too. And like, but he was probably a radical cult leader of a small group of people. And I wouldn't say everything he taught was a good thing necessarily. If you take the Gospels and what they say Jesus said to the bank. So Christians, inevitably, I think the teaching of Jesus is too difficult for most people to even try to live because it's hate this life kind of model that you see in the Gospels and in Paul. Go to your death, carry your cross, which what did it mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus? It meant go to die for him. Well, how many Christians do you see do that? Okay, not common. It was easier to make it a political religion that actually would be able to weaponize and find ways to go and conquer and do what I think comes natural in patriarchal societies and antiquity. So I don't know.
Yeah, and even Derek, that like the sheep, like shepherd kind of, analogies throughout, like this very much like, yeah, just be led, like just be a follower, an absolute follower. But again, you're right. Like I was shocked because I'd only heard, of Jesus' light. Like when I even got wind of the fact that there were, what about the dark teachings of Jesus? I never even knew that there were certain quotes or sayings attributed to him that could potentially take a turn for the worse, essentially. So when I was exposed to that as well, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because all we're ever taught is, love thy neighbor, and he who hasn't sinned cast the first stone. And, Jesus has none of the marital, colorful life, should I say, for lack of a better word, compared to Muhammad. So he's already like got a massive clean slate in that regard, because Muhammad's life is extreme, like his personal life is so disastrous. And it calls into question, him being a prophet. Not that there's ever a true prophet, but it calls into question his prophethood, per se. And I always felt like, again, Jesus was shielded from that. But you're right. If you look into the scholarship, there are arguments to be had for all of the same pinpoints. Like Muhammad, he turned away from what his fathers, or let's say like, the general people around him were believing at the time. As soon as he amassed something, he talked about, he genuinely believed in apocalyptic times. He thought that like we were nearing the ends back then. Mm-hmm. So again, that flies in the face of Muslims saying the end times was coming, because Muhammad thought it was coming while he was still alive, pretty much. Right. But yeah, you're right that there's also those parallels of how, they broke away, like Muhammad crushing the idols, and then teaching them the new ways, that the ways that were, everything before this was the Jahiliyyah, or the era of ignorance, and now we're cleansed of that. I guess it's the same way that Jesus broke off, or at least how Christianity essentially as a sect started to break away, the first Christians anyway. But yeah, the parallels are wild.
It's interesting. There's a scholar, Hector Avalos, he's dead now, who is well aware of Old Testament, New Testament, and he points out that he thinks we can go to ancient Hebrew Bible stuff, and you and me could probably jaw drop to think about some of the crazy stuff, human sacrifice, elements of Jephthah's daughter, Canaanite conquest, of absolute annihilation of the Canaanites in the land, finding places where Yahweh seems to be behind the killing of people, and is like, good, destroy them evil people and stuff. And most people go, whoa, that God can't be the God that I believe in, which spawned a group in early Christianity like the Marcionites, who said that Jesus's father was a different God. There's no way that Jesus's father can be that God. And so they found a way to say that's an evil God. He's the evil demiurge, the evil creator who created where we see this world that's full of hate and evil. But Jesus' God is actually a God of love. I just want to point out, Avalos says he even thinks it's arguable that the New Testament is even more violent than the Old. And I'm like, well, how did you do that now? I know this is debatable, but his point is that if you take it at face value, the Hebrew Bible lacks eternal conscious torment and burning in hell or any of those notions. If you take it that the shepherd is going to separate the sheep from the goat, the wheat from the chaff, and that he will be in charge of saying, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you, being the judge of all the living and the dead, and end up having you be tormented for all eternity, then in a sense, Jesus is the biggest dictator. And you think the Holocaust is bad, try an everlasting burning oven for human beings. Okay, so now we put it into perspective. Of course, I think that's completely fictive, but people do believe this stuff and actually think this is literally true. So he said it's technically even more horrific than a human in real life, especially if you have all eternity to pay for the rewards of things that are happening. In real life, killing someone is nothing compared to this ongoing forever and ever torment that Jesus is going to be the judge and ruler of. And one little fact that I just want to point out about the book of Revelation, there's a book that was just done called Armageddon by Bart D. Ehrman, but he goes through some of the history of the scholarship and how it was utilized in combat situations in war times. Who are the enemies? Well, we can find in our Revelation, pinpoint and say, hey, this is fulfilling prophecy. And oftentimes when early Christian Zionists, of course, were playing a role in some of the stuff that's going on in the Middle East, they wanted to make the second coming of Jesus happen sooner. So they coercively involved their money and their trying to make Jesus come back to destroy the enemy. It's like they just like, yes, Lord, come and kill them all kind of mentality. Very violent. So even if they aren't violent themselves, let's just say they have kind of a pacifistic way of life, their mentality is violent. And that doesn't mean they wouldn't get behind someone who's violent and things like that. So
this is what's really scary, though, Derek, like when they actually think like that. That's what I was trying to ask you, like how dangerous can this mentality go? Because if you seep in, I want to bring on the end times. And even like with this conflict in the Middle East, you can see like some evangelical Christians were, like you said, making moves in the sense that we want to see this battle play out and we know whose side we're on. And again, this is all scripture related and inspired. We have to at least, make that connection. It is. So how is this an alarmingly worrying number of people, or like is this what the average fundamental Christian thinks in their living room, that this is what they genuinely want to happen?
I don't want to, I can't judge every fundamentalist because I think there's shades of gray fundamentalism. It's not a one size fits all, but I do think it's very prevalent because we're so in the West, we're so polar opposite. You're Democrat, you're liberal, you're woke, the list goes on and on. You're right wing, you're Nazi, you're this. It's so polarizing. And then couple that with some of the fanaticism we find in the religion and the beliefs that underlie some of the stuff. Yeah, it's like a volcano, I feel, that might erupt. And so while we're trying to grant Christianity's modernity, and we can see that, I mean, it's evident that Christianity in many places is a philosophy that has calmed down and it's not necessarily on the same conquest. But some people argue that the political drive of people in the West, some of the people in charge, are motivated. Their conquest motivated with Christianity as an underlying philosophy that drives them to do some of the things they do. Sure, you can find elements that are very good teachings. The golden rule, help the poor, help the widow, help the hungry, clothe those who have no clothes. But you can find that in Hebrew scriptures too. And I can show you some pretty grotesque literature in the Hebrew scriptures about how God and Israelites are supposed to act, or how they're supposed to go and kill and all these things. So you can find good and ugly in all of them, including Islam. I would say there are many things I'm sure we could go to and go, that's actually a good teaching. That's a good thing, I think, here. But you and me have chips on our shoulders and can easily quickly go, yeah, but what about this? I mean, dressing women in garbage bags, and like, what about like all this crazy stuff? And that's why
the good outweighs the bad by far. sorry, the bad outweighs the good.
I knew what you meant.
By far, yeah. And the good things, again, we're probably all low-key doing anyway, and they're very basic. I mean, Derek said, like, the golden rule, we don't really even have that in Islam per se, not from God himself. Maybe you'll find some nice fluffy hadiths on that. But yeah, like giving charity, again, it's not the best in Islam. It's for Muslims first, to fellow Muslims. So again, Islam is not, it's not the easiest to find really, really nice things. You could say like, oh yeah, be kind to your parents. But it's only if they also believe in Allah, and heaven lies at your mother's feet was what we were told. That hadith does not exist. It's made up. So I don't know. There's probably some nice things. I thought there is a hadith somewhere. I'm not sure the strength of it, but it says, obey the law of the land that you're in. And for me, I was like, but that's good. Maybe more Muslims should be doing that in Western countries. But yeah, it's always pick and choose with that. But Derek, I did want to ask you one thing real quickly as well. Just something weird that I experienced today, and I'm sure it's the same in Christianity. But I basically attended this session at lunchtime today to overcome the taboo of mental health in Muslim communities. And they were like trying to like tell us how to deal with clients of, of Muslim faiths. And they were like, a lot of the reasons that Muslims don't, first of all, recognize mental health or don't get help for it. You know how we were mentioning the prison situation and how it's really easy to be usurped by a certain ideology if it kind of, makes you feel better at the time. But they were giving so many reasons, which I also understand. Like, I can see mental health is rife throughout the Muslim community here. I would say even members of my own extended family, I would think, they've just been left undiagnosed for so long because either at some point they were told that they were possessed, or they thought themselves that they had, no joke, Derek, and this might sound weird to some of your like ex-Muslim or Muslim viewers, but genuinely that somebody had put like a spell of black magic on them. And so you just kind of have to like do weird things like burn chilies and check a thread and walk through a graveyard to like undo it, because all these weird things could have been done to you. Or it's Allah's will and he wants you to experience this, because even in the Quran it says he will not give you anything like a burden too large that you can't, shoulder. So all of these reasons are why people don't get like help for mental health as well. And then what they did, Derek, it was crazy. Like, there's so many hadiths where the Prophet has mentioned ridiculous cures for things. Like he says, black cumin, I think it's black seed oil is like the elixir of life. It cures everything but death. He said things like, if a fly wing drops in your drink, just put the other wing in and it's fine to drink. And, he says you can wash, like do ablution in water that's been filled in an area with menstrual pads, not pads, they didn't have them in those days, but like menstrual cloths, and where dogs have peed. And he's like, water is water. It's just, it's never dirty or clean. And he said all these things, but they chose two hadiths in this. And this is the UK. Okay. And this is like an impartial, supposedly organization, part of the National Health Service. And they picked two hadith where the Prophet, and again, I'm glad they're doing this because the Muslim community needs support, but it's so cherry picked. Like, they found the two weakest hadiths, the weakest chains in the link. And the lady that was presenting actually mistook the hadith for the Quran and said, this is from the Quran, al-Bukhari. And then she read it and I was just like, my jaw dropped. I was like, wow. And all of these, like, obviously, non-Muslim practitioners are there like, thank you so much. They literally, Derek said, the first mental health hospital was opened in Islam in Baghdad in like, I don't know what, 800 and something. And all these like non-Muslim people are like, wow, it's so nice to learn about Islamic history. I'm going to tell this next time. And I was like, the amount of misinformation was spreading on like a policy level and this just makes me like realize why I have to keep doing what I'm doing even more. But I'm sure it's the same thing with Christianity, like mental health, not recognizing it, combined with all these vulnerable states and abuse, and then being said that this is God's plan, or like you know, it's just it's the cycle of abuse will continue. You'll never heal.
You're describing my own experience, so I know that this has to be something that fundamentalist in America, I say is fundamentalist because I'm pretty positive when you go into different avenues of Christianity, and I'm not going to name which ones because I don't know exactly, would say, hey, look, this is not a demon. These are not devils or Satan or anything like that. This is something, mental health. You need to go to a doctor. This is physiological. This is physical. This has nothing to do with good, bad. And you got to respect people when they do that, when they are able to do that in their traditions. But without a doubt, I was told the reason I had addiction to drugs is either I had a curse on me, and Jesus can supposedly break all curses. I had either demons in me, spirits that controlled me, or that in some way were enslaving me to the drug. And the same went for masturbation. Like, why did we naturally do these things? This is actually a spirit. This is a demon. This is Satan. And they never said this is natural, because there's been an unhealthy relationship between the body and nature within Christianity at its outset, especially thanks to the way Platonism, the philosophy of Plato, and this lower world we live in, because higher's good, lower's bad, where you have the material world. This is a bad world. Flesh is bad. The New Testament talks about over and over. Sex is not a good thing. Jesus encourages people to become eunuchs, even in the Gospel of Matthew. And of course, Origen, early church father, from what I can tell, many scholars think he may have actually cut the whole thing off and became a eunuch. So whether Jesus taught that, that's up for grabs too. But at the end of the day, like it's gearing two different ideas toward keep repopulating, keep having babies, and women are saved through this process, to don't have any more babies. The end is tomorrow. There's no reason to do this. Try not to focus on the flesh, a resistance to these natural tendencies. And so that's taught. And in many fundamentalist circles, they're reading face value what these texts say. And at least it seems that way, that's what the original text seemed to be implying. And fundamentalism can see some of that stuff, and I think accurately are portraying what a lot of the stuff we see in the New Testament would have probably meant to the context in which it was written, and they're applying it to the 21st century. Sorry for rambling to give you all this stuff, but I thought I had demons. I thought I had spirits. And when I finally went down a more scientific, more of a natural world, as a theist, as a believer in God, not a naturalist, but realized that the solutions to these problems were not in spiritual remedies. They were not in this book. They were not in God and these ideas. It was actually in natural, sociological, psychological, behavioral, like changing your behavioral patterns type of settings. And of course, even in those settings, like the 12-step groups of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, they say it's God. But in fact, as I've studied further, it's the social group that makes you feel connected. It's the people in the group that help you heal in that process, because we evolved to be social creatures and to connect. And when you get an addiction, for me, I isolate and I don't connect. I try to hide. I'm ashamed and I try to hide. So getting connection is what helped me get clean. Anyway, I just gave you my conversion story.
I love it. I love it. Each time I hear you getting that agency back, and then even looking at like using the 12-step program, but then even detaching the God element from that and saying, actually, this is just part of the natural human experience of coming together for a collective cause, feeling that motivation. I love it. I can hear it 100 more times, Derek. I love hearing this. Hey, women and men. Yes.
Right? Oh, yeah. Good. I didn't mean it like that. That's a funny. I think, wasn't there something like that in the not too not too distant past, someone did like a woman, some joke on Twitter or something.
I must have missed it.
I don't want to leave anything out that you might want to add to this before we get to super chats. I think this has been a heck of a discussion, and I'm sure you and I can go, and there's so much to talk about that we could cover. But is there anything that you might want to get off your chest, something that you've thought about that you didn't get to talk about?
Thank you for asking. No, I will let you get to super chats. I think I would just probably like to obviously say that I'm really grateful that we did have this conversation, because I try and make time to do this as well, where yes, I've left Islam, but I also do reject other religions and worldviews for the very same reasons that I have rejected Islam. They pose the same problems and the same threats, albeit not as extensively at the minute as Islam. Again, this can vary contextually, but in general, like my genuine fight is against Islam. But all of these kind of genuine fights and battles for a more rational, secular, progressive world where religions will be protected, but they're just not going to be shoved down our throats in the way that we're seeing in America or here in England. So I think that's where we come together. And I love like teaming up with people like Derek, who's willing to go that full mile. It's like you leave. You go through something, you see it for what it is, and you share that experience, but then you be intellectually honest and you follow that journey wherever it leads you. And I think that's what your channel is doing, which is amazing. But I just want to say to anyone that's listening, like even me having left Islam for maybe 6 years now, 5-6 years I'm coming to, I am still unlearning. Like this, sometimes news events trigger me to unlearn preconceived notions or ideas that I had. This conflict in the Middle East taught me how much just crap I held in my mind once upon a time, certain views that I held that I'm still in the process of actively learning about to unlearn, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this conversation. I think Derek and I can have a million of these, but I mean, it's never enough, because this is a continual process of unlearning. And hopefully, as we said in the beginning, if you look into a religion honestly, searching for some kind of truth to it, holding truth to being what truth actually means, you will see common patterns and a common denominator through all of them. And they go, especially even if you go out and you go into the real world, you will see that. I love what you said in your video about, sorry, I forgot the doctor's name, but holy sites always remain holy. We learned the same thing at university here. Every time Islam conquered, it was on a pre-existing either Christian site or some kind of even pagan site, and they've if you archaeologically dig, you will see the cultures overtaking each other. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say. That's why I absolutely love Derek's work. But thank you, Derek. It was an epic chat.
Yeah, it's always great talking to you. It's been a minute, and everyone should subscribe to Holy Humanist. For anyone who doesn't know, I have a playlist on Islam from a critical scholarly standpoint. So for those who want to go, you love to always critique Christianity. Totally guilty. I was a Christian. What am I supposed to do? Talk about a religion that I'm not as aware of? Anyway, I have my own bones to pick with it because of the harm it has caused me. And there's a bit of freedom when you realize that you can have fun with the Bible in a whole new way. It's not, I always believe this literally and read this one. No. Critical scholarship. Holy Humanist, subscribe, please, to her YouTube channel. I hope she gets more and more and more attention, because we need free thought. We need people who have broken of the chains, the shackles of some of the harmful things we see in religion. And one thing I like about you too, Nuriyah, is how friendly you are even to people who are in it, because you understand that they're, in a sense, victims of the same thing that you were. And are you going to judge yourself simply because if you met yourself in this religion at the time? No, a lot of us are victims of the very thing, and we have to empathize and understand that there's something cognitive, psychological about being in it. And so judging them because they're in it, I guess what I'm saying is hate the game, don't hate the player.
Amen for you, Derek.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? In this situation, you can be critical of the religion. You can be critical of the books, the literature, the ugly things that are in it, and people if they are being ugly. But there are many people, there are lots of people who just don't know and maybe trapped not knowing, can't see it they're stuck, cognitive dissonance, who knows what. So try to be patient the best you can, empathize. And I hope they do the same for us from their
come
side of
on.
the fence. Yeah.
That's the least we can like ask for. We're not asking for too much, are we? We're offering that courtesy. Surely we deserve it back. That's just civility now.
Exactly. So thank you for your time and coming in here because you're busy. You're very busy. Let's try and get through these.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you want me to stick around for these, Derek? I can stick around for this. Yeah, sure.
I won't keep you too long. Some
That's
of them
fine.
probably address something you and I both have said.
Sure.
Seth of Valhalla, thank you for the super chat. How about this answer from a former Christian and then a former Muslim? Both are made up by men. I'm going to enjoy this. Agree. Thank you so much.
Touche. Well, I saw Derek's title and I was like, yeah, both are nonsense, but here we go. Let's do it.
Right. Poppy John, thank you for the super chat. We all need to get along and take care of each other no matter what beliefs we have. I agree. It's hard, though. It is hard to, when we have such polarizing views and it's part of our identity. Like, people criticize atheists all the time. I don't bat an eye. It doesn't even matter to me. Like, if I'm wrong about my particulars, okay. Agnosticism is a very reasonable position, I think. If let's just say I was wrong about atheism at the end of the day, I'm pretty confident about these deities in these books being man-made and not being true. And there's many ways to falsify that philosophically, textually. There's a lot of interesting things. So, but yeah, I agree with Poppy John here. I think we should try to get along no matter what.
Same. Call out Islamists, but get along with everyone else.
Thank you. Ronan of Stag. 10QU. I think thank you. Is that what this was?
It's thank you in numerals, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and your channel, Nuriyah.
Oh, thank you, Ronan. Thank you for being here and for your super chat.
Thank you so much. Mario, let's go to the next one here. Mario Marufo. Just saw her on Seth Andrews. Much respect, though I have some geopolitical issues like the official U.S. support for jihadism over the past 40 years.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah, I love that interview with Seth. So I've looked into more of the UK support for jihadism. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the US and what you think the US, how they've been funding them. I know that universities have been really affected and they've literally infiltrated like the education sector, because that's also how they radicalized a lot of people in like my father's generation. But yeah, I would love to dive into this deeper with you. Again, I don't know enough about the US kind of, dealings with Islam, but I would love to pick your brains on that at some point.
Yeah, from what I've heard, and as someone who's not up to speed on all geopolitical issues and such, that America funded many of these radical groups to fight against Russia in the 90s. We had a Cold War, and so we backed up radicalizing the very people that turned against us, that we then had to fight eventually. And you could even go so far as to say maybe even some of that funding played a role in, I'm not putting all the blame, everyone shares blame here, but like in some of what we see with bin Laden and how all that plays out, America has a role in radicalizing many people in the Middle East. And of course, it's pretty crazy to hear how many of these people we considered good guys turned them into terrorists who attack us.
Yeah, from freedom fighters to terrorists. Yeah, yep. I guess it's like, obviously, when the importation of democracy doesn't go according to plan, there's like a vacuum that's left, and then these people are already armed up, and that they then become the force that now you have to confront, as opposed to the ones who are helping you keep another force at bay. But yeah, it's a messy situation.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Robert, good to see you here. Robert Mahaney, thank you for being in the chat. I hope I didn't miss any comment by you, my friend. Usually you'll drop one and then not have a comment. I'm trying to scroll up to make sure I didn't miss it. Stop scamming, man. Imnag and the Hizzy. Stop scamming, man. I'm trying not to make sure I miss anything in case you wanted to say something specific. All right. Apologize for the time here. Bear with me. There's a lot of comments today. Nuriyah, right. You're sparking interest here. I think people are enjoying it. Okay, I can't find it.
Oh, Robert, okay.
I don't think he had a comment though, because it was just the super chat here without words. So I'm going to move forward. Mnag with the massive super in the house. Really, thank you so much for the support. Would it be fair to say that at this point in time, Islam is the most dangerous religion? Seems like Muslim men are the most extreme. What are your thoughts on that as someone who knows Islam?
I would say I would still stand by saying, yeah, Islam is definitely the most dangerous religion in modern times. It's like the biggest kind of cancer that's like a stain on humanity that we have to fight. And yes, to make logically, it would follow that Muslim men, therefore, are the most extreme because they're the ones who are enabling this and keeping it going in the way that it's going. And again, Muslim women, when Derek was mentioning like victims, the reason we treat them as victims of Islam is because women are very much at the behest of men in this ideology. But if Muslim women were to leave, then Muslim men would not have the access to increasing numbers by these high birth rates and things like that, and Islam would not be even growing at the level that it's growing. But yeah, if you look at the major threats to just current progress and modernity, it is jihadi groups, and these are quite literally Salafi, Wahhabi, really literalist interpreting Muslims, and again, very disenfranchised from wherever they're coming from. There's potential reasons behind it, but one of them is the Quran. So yeah, I would agree with you, Mnag, and thank you so much for your support for Derek's channel.
Thank you. I definitely don't feel, I mean, I could give my thoughts. I do think that's the case as well. But, I would want to look even more into that, look at numbers and such. And you've done all that. So that's why it's good that you're commenting on it. Nuri Suna, thank you so much for the super chat. Accounts mentioning wars of Muhammad aren't accepted by many academics. But Derek, I have a book coming out soon. Can I offer a free copy in a few months? Discusses theology, eschatology, etc. within 7th century context. Yes, you can. Just email me. My emails are in every description. And if not, I can put it in the chat. But mythvisionpodcast@gmail.com. And I'll be more than happy to look at what you put together. But yeah, accounts mentioning wars of Muhammad aren't accepted by many academics. I think this is like the later literature describing the life of Muhammad and what the Sunnah, and seeing like, did he do this or did he do that? I imagine critical scholars are trying to say what's historical and what's not in some of that literature. Is that what we're getting at, you think, Nuri?
I think so. I mean, because I've only read I've read like Karen Armstrong's take on it and stuff. Obviously, she tries to water it down. But even like Peter Frankopan in the Silk Roads, he taught, when he's generally describing like the history of the world, he doesn't hold back in describing the way that Muhammad was, like an aggressive warlord, and he was the aggressor at many times. So yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, I turn to your channel mostly for like impartial academia towards Islam, because I haven't seen any really for the life of me coming out. But yeah, if you've got academics who are denying it, obviously that's worrying.
It wouldn't shock me though, in light of, you could be critical of Christianity. And by the way, even in that, while we talk about modernity, you don't find, obviously you don't have the same kind of resistance. So if you wanted to talk about in an academic setting, does Allah exist? Or does this God of the Quran actually exist? You probably will never find right now a publication that is going to be allowed to go through the university with that kind of philosophical topic without extreme resistance. And it damn sure won't be published or circulated in the Middle East, it seems. But in South Africa, I have a scholar who wrote 20 years ago a book called, or worked on his PhD called, Does Yahweh Exist? And he tries to blend philosophy and textual criticism with the scholarship of the field together to show why Yahweh does not exist. Not a very popular thesis, and was, he said, caught a lot of crap, but in secular university, he was able to do it. So even that is just barely being kind of allowed in these universities. But a lot of the critical scholars I've spoken to have told me they have to be careful. They have to be careful because they want to make friendship with the Middle East and the scholarship over there, but they have their blocks, they're not trying to allow too much of the secular scholarship out there.
Derek, Saudi Arabia's they've literally bulldozed all of the supposed sites that I even used to go to when I was a child, that apparently linked to the cave that Muhammad took refuge in, or obviously just the first form, the first basic sites to Islam. Yeah. Wow. And now you've got the Rolex gold tower come up, and right next to the Kaaba and the major, where the Haram Sharif it's called, but you've got that. And so the cave where Muhammad was born, all these places now have been bulldozed, and they basically, when Western archaeologists have asked for permission to go to Saudi to kind of verify these claims of Islam and Islamic history, they've been denied. And then as these denials were happening, these sites no longer are able to be excavated anymore. So some of this is now consigned to history. And this is again why I think Islam just flexed in ways unimaginable, because the Bible gets the scrutiny that when it has to stand up to historical excavation and things like that, and timelines that are thrown at it. Islam is a bit already Mecca is questionable, right? There's the Petra theories, there's a bunch of things going on, there's Yemen, there's South Arabia, all of this is happening, but Mecca itself have been if this was something, it beggars belief. If this was something sacred, and this was literally the first places where the Prophet of Islam has stepped and slept and died and worshipped for the first time and changed the position of prayer from Jerusalem, from all of these things are sacred sites you don't bulldoze. What are you doing? Right. Yeah, I don't know, Nuri. There is Nuri Sana. There's probably, there's a lot of mystery and a lot of things we'll never probably even know objectively.
Right. I think that doing that keeps you from being able to check, falsify. Yeah. But at the same time, from what I could tell from Robert G. Hoyland, who's an expert in early Islam, when I talked to him about this and what they were doing in those sites, he said they just accept the narrative, believe it, and they don't need to do any archaeology. They don't want to test it. It is true. Period. Moving on. That's how solid they just accept the tradition. And it sucks that they would do that to these sites, because be a great way to kind of see the evolution of the tradition here. I mean, I was just pulling up before we went live. I'll share the screen just to show people, since we're on this topic, about what I would think reading this. I went and pulled up list of legends in the Quran. Dispute over origins. The Quran mentions, and this is an interesting, thou doth protest too much. The Quran mentions accusations by non-believers, contemporaries of Muhammad, that many stories in the Quran are fables. Those who disbelieve say this Quran is but a fabrication which he, Muhammad himself, has invented, and some others have helped him with it. So they have produced a wrong and a falsehood. They also say it consists of only fables of the ancients, which he has got written. They are being read to him in early mornings and evenings while people are at home. Say it is a book full of knowledge, revealing many secrets, such as no human being could in any wise discover by himself. He who knows all the secrets contained in the heavens and the earth sends it down to teach you some of these secrets and guide you in your life so that you may attain happiness of both worlds. He surely is all forgiving and all compassionate. So, you know where I'm going in my head. I'm thinking this looks like there's an accusation that he's learning this stuff not from the angel Gabriel, so to speak, but from Jews.
Copycat.
Right. Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, he got made fun of a lot for that. That was haunting him. And again, I think Abdullah Samir has a brilliant video on the Quran and like just Arabic poetry that was being recited in the way, because it was a very oral tradition at the time anyway. So I will try and send Derek that link. You guys should check it out. It's amazing. I thought I was hearing the Quran, and when I left Islam and I didn't want to let go of the, sounds ridiculous, but what I thought was the beauty of the Quran, I would listen to this non-Quranic version of pre-Islamic Arabic than I did the Quran, because it sounded like the exact same thing. But yeah, sorry, Derek, go ahead.
No. Thank you. Stop Scamming Man says on Dr. Javad Hashmi's channel, Dr. Joshua Little gives his reasons why hadiths are far, far less reliable than Muslim scholars think. I found most of it convincing, though not really his main effort, revising Aisha's age. I personally have mad respect for trying to figure out what's history and not. Here's my reason. Tell me what you think about the hadith, applying it to Islam. If we found out that Israel never led a conquest against the Canaanites to slaughter every man, woman, and child because God said so, meaning it's a fictional account, it never happened, it's just a story describing the origins of a nation, and that story goes all the way back to creation, but it leads down to we were in Egypt for 400 years, then we conquered this land, this is how we end up here, and this is God's land. But really none of that happened in history, which means if we found out it didn't happen, should we actually do this in real life, in real history? No. Do you see why I think if we could find some of the ugly things that are in hadith to be fiction and not actually what happened, may be helpful toward Muslims who kind of look to this stuff to imitate it in their real lives? Well, if it didn't really happen, why should I imitate it? You see what I'm trying to get at?
I agree. That would be a nice step as well. Again, you're becoming more of a Quranist, and you're letting those things go, and you're like, and that's what, by the way, Derek, a lot of Muslims are Sunni Muslims anyway, because for Sunnis it's like integral, yeah, with the Quran, it's the Hadith, and that's how you follow his Sunnah. But they're letting go of that. They're just like, oh, we don't know. It's a telephone game. Come on, it's he said, she said, he said. No, she. Yeah. Well, narrated by Aisha. She's narrated a few. She's told us a lot, but it's usually like he said to he said to he said to he said. So again, that wouldn't stand up in a court of law today. So at least Muslims who are like, again, if I deny the Quran is the word of God, then I'm beefing with God. But like if I'm denying the Hadith, I'm still at least denying people. So I guess the Hadith is like the way that you could, some of the logic you could apply to why you can leave behind bits of the Bible.
Wow. Thank you. Stop Scamming Man. Many Christian ministers and priests are aware of critical scholarship. Very few such Muslims who know of critical scholarship on Islam, like idol worship seeming to have ceased 300 years before Muhammad. I don't know about this particular claim that there was no idol worship for 300 years before Muhammad, but have you heard of that one?
I'm not sure about that as well, because from Islamic history, it tells you it was rampant. So it's part of Muhammad's story, right? To like reject that, which is critical to the monotheism of Islam, and shirk being the worst crime in Islam, like tantamount to treason. So you would never get to heaven for committing that crime. So I'm not sure if it was like that far down in the human psyche, but according to Islamic history, it definitely wasn't.
Thank you. Imnag, Nuriyah, we have so much in common. My evangelical church told me for years I had demons and was possessed. Very traumatizing.
I know, Imnag. I'm so sorry. This is what I'm saying. Like these common denominators by people who have like experienced religion and heard these things and left religion. It sounds like whack to us that, you know, you're, especially if there's nothing wrong with you, but you're just veering off the path. And then they put these labels on you, like you're possessed, or there's a demon in you, or you need therapy, or you need help, or you need to read the Bible more, you need to repent. It's always like you, fault, and like, you know, fear and repentance and all of these kind of negative impacts. But I think an interesting point, again, with Islam, all of those same things that Christianity has, the magical aspects, the demonic aspects, they all come into play. It takes you so far away from reality. And in the Islamic context as well, they made an interesting point in the presentation saying the Arabic language, especially like the classical Arabic language, the Quran was written in, didn't have words for obviously like, mental health or depression or schizophrenia or anxiety. These words don't even exist in the general language. So you're not going to understand those concepts. The concept is you're good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, possessed, not possessed. So that's kind of what we're dealing with as a paradigm.
Wow. Thank you, Imnag. Stop scamming, man. I think another reason for the mental health problems is first cousin marriages, generation after generation. Islam's barriers between unrelated men and women mingling is conducive to this problem.
Yes, that's sorry for the long to anyone listening. Yeah, that is definitely it was a massive issue here in the UK, and it was it was an issue on such a policy level that the government had to tackle it and put out education awareness campaigns and things like that. And I'm not shying away from it. It was disproportionately within the British Pakistani community. Not even Arab Muslims don't do this as much as Muslims from Pakistan do this. Even Indian Muslims don't do this as much. So it is very much concentrated. But again, yes, having I think consanguinity run for generation after generation in your family is not good for anyone's mental health. Absolutely.
Wow. So much to learn. Hadrian, thank you for the super chat. Just because I was oppressed, it does not justify in taking other oppressors as partners just to fight my own oppression. An advice from my professor.
Oh, Hadrian. Hadrian's my friend, Derek, and he is someone I was referring to when I said he left Islam and he turned Christian for a while, and then he left. But he did fall into that, this is close enough. Let's minus the bad parts of Islam and let's take this for what it is. But then I think, Hadrian, I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting your story, but I think it was evangelicals or something in the end. They were just a bit too much and you got put off, or you saw the light of atheism. I'm joking.
Right. That's interesting.
But yeah.
Maybe we'll meet sometime. Stop scamming, man. Hi, Derek. I think an episode on Shia Islam would really be good for the discourse, acknowledging, of course, that you are spectacularly busy. I am busy, but we can always try to figure out a way to cover this. I wanted to do a Sunni Shia split episode with a scholar, and that is fascinating in and of itself. The break and what happened in the two groups. There's a book that covers that, an audiobook. The female scholar, I don't know if it was the one that you mentioned earlier, but
Karen Armstrong?
I think if she has an audiobook on this,
she probably does.
It was good. It was good. It makes you go, what the heck is going on between the break, the split? Anyway.
This is super interesting. I'll be there, Derek. If you're there, I'll be listening intently. I love learning about this. And fun fact, I actually think if I knew about the split, I would have gone to, if I didn't have a choice in the matter, I would have gone to the Shia side, but that's a story for another day.
That is. I'd love to cover that sometime. Radar Apologetics, thank you for the super chat. Derek, are you critical of Tovia Singer's Judaism like other religions? Let me pause and say, absolutely. Anyone who watches my YouTube channel can see my last video is about child sacrifice to Yahweh, the name of the deity that is not supposed to be spoken in Judaism. So yes, I am very critical of Tovia Singer's Judaism in the sense that I do videos over and over and over on the Hebrew Bible, showing its mythology, showing there's horrific moral issues with the book that we call the Bible, including the New Testament and such. If so, why have him on the show? Hypocrite a bit? So this is obviously in light of my David Wood video. And so I have Tovia to come on to take jabs at the New Testament to hear his critical thoughts about Judaism and how he, as an Orthodox Jew, observes the New Testament and being critical of that, what he sees in Paul's letters, what he sees in the Gospels, the anti-Semitism that we find that starts to flourish within the New Testament text. The Gospel of John, Book of Acts maybe starts to show this as well, blaming the Jews over and over for why Christians are being imprisoned by Rome. The Jews are conspiring to kill them. The Jews want to stone Stephen to death. The Jews. Anyway, so it's an interesting thing. I don't have him as a co-host, so I think I'm pretty consistent on once in a while I have Rabbi join me to do critical responses on New Testament. I think it's an interesting duo to have happen. But I'm not going to bring him on every show, because if I did that, it would be tense. I can't be critical of, I could, but it would just be more like a debate and friction rather than me being free to be critical as I'd like on his own religion. But I don't have an axe to grind specifically with Rabbi. He's like the only apologist in the Jewish world that's doing this kind of stuff, when there are millions of Christian apologists being critical of atheists and Islam and all of these things. Only one Jewish apologist online, Rabbi Tovia Singer. So if you think I'm a hypocrite because I have him on the show, then, well, I can't convince you otherwise. But I've had a lot of people be angry at me for that, Nuriyah. Like, you don't debate him. You don't challenge Rabbi on Judaism. Why don't you do that?
People don't understand.
Anyway.
People don't understand, like, your fight is, when you come out of a religion, that's like your major, that's your bullseye. Then everything else is like, oh, well, I'm learning from you, but you don't necessarily have to go like all guns blazing. At least that's my approach anyway. I'm like, everyone's coming at their own thing from very personal and different positions, but you have, as long as you've made your position clear, on certain matters, then I got the same thing, Eric, and I ended up pandering. I did a video on Judaism, did a video on Hinduism. Not that I know basically anything about these, right? But just to say, oh, you're atheist, why don't you talk about anything else? Well, here you go. Here's like somebody who's telling you that this is equally as bad.
Right. Well, what I find interesting too is I have several scholars who are Christians that I've interviewed. So anyone who watches my material enough to educate themselves, to learn from academia, will realize Derek's interviewed several actual Christian scholars. They may not be fundamentalists, because honestly, there's not much to learn in terms of factual data on the ground, in my opinion, that I'm observing that relates to reality, that I can learn from secular scholars who are Christian, theist, agnostic, atheist, doesn't matter their ontology, that bring good argumentation and evidence to the table to at least consider. So anyway, I gotta use the restroom here in a minute, so I'm hoping. James Hampton, XJW here, love the message. Cult mind think in all religions, us that have deacon relate in our process. Can you comment the bite model and how this might apply? Can I use a restroom while you know the bite model, right? You're muted.
Sorry, it's the authoritarian control model, but I can't speak on it, to be honest.
Okay.
Beyond that, yeah. I know Islam obviously fits in there. And mad respect, by the way, ex-Jehovah's Witness as well. I think we feel each other's pain. But yeah.
I feel the same pain in terms of trying to tell you what each acronym represents and all the details, but I know that highly controlled groups and Jehovah's Witnesses for sure fit that model. But even, there's lesser versions of that bite model that fit even in the most generic Christianity. Psychologically, I would imagine that a lot of this still applies. So it's a cult, but may not be as controlling and as dangerous as some of the more high controlled, like Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, certain Mormons, Scientology.
Derek, if you want to use the restroom, I can talk a little bit about Islam and what I've just realized, how much it controls. Okay, sure. So cool. James, this is what I think as well about like the level of control within Islam. I'm sure you can relate, because I think these are like high intensity, like authoritarian cults. But if you look at Islam, like, for example, the call to prayer 5 times a day, which was also like bargained down from, like, Moses told Muhammad on his night journey that your people won't be able to pray 50 prayers a day or whatever it was. So Muhammad literally bargained with God to bring it down to 5. But then I also started thinking about it as, if you think like Muhammad, as if you think of him as a warlord, and then you think of him trying to galvanize his men or an army, and then being called 5 times a day from like a central like pulpit in the mosque or something, it's essentially like almost like a military roll call as well. Or that's at least the thought that came into my head, that it almost seems like a roll call to see who's reporting for duty and who's not. And Islam has these weird things as well, where if you come back from a battle, you're not supposed to go to your home at night. You're supposed to spend the night in a mosque because you don't know essentially who's sleeping with who while you're away. But if you listen to the way that a Muslim is supposed to pray, essentially you can get away with like reciting the exact same like 4 or 5 surahs or verses when you're praying, and it's the exact same movements. So essentially 5 times a day you could be repeating the exact same thing. And like some of the Quran verses are literally like cursing out Abu Lahab, like from Muhammad's time and his wife, and you're cussing him into like the worst kind of punishment. But Muslims are doing that sometimes 5 times a day because it's a short surah or short verse, but they essentially have no idea what they're saying. So there's that, and then there's so it's 5 prayers a day. And then on Friday, the Jummah prayer, which is like the extra special prayer, which basically, even if for some reason you're not praying 5 times a day at home, most Muslim men are obligated to attend that. And that's when you get the like really communal feeling again. And then on top of that, just the control of like literally telling you which foot to use to enter the bathroom. There's a dua, like a prayer you say before you have sex. It does not give you a second to breathe and be in your own head. And you can see how that is such a control tactic, because somebody has no opportunity to think for themselves, and it's so much repetition. And so, like reinforced behavior, and then reinforced behavior in numbers. Again, I'm sure you can relate. It's very much the same tactics they employ across the board. Derek, I hope you're a bit relieved now.
Yeah, I drinking water, going to the gym, so the water just comes straight through me.
Oh, good. You're on a health flex. I love it.
I'm trying. Amin Ra, I married a Muslim woman. Some of my wife's kids are devout Muslims. Muslim history viewpoints is quite obviously distorted. I think that's what they mean to say, in my opinion. Is there anything to recommend of things I can do to have positive impact? Thank you for the super chat.
Oh, I mean, to be honest, it's a tough one, because I would say that this... yeah, without rocking the boat too much and rocking the relationship and the family dynamics.
Right.
I think what you can always do is just what I do at my home is to present the counter argument, I guess, in a very respectful manner, and just show that beyond their views or beyond the Islamic worldview, there is also a worldview that doesn't leave you as what they like to call like degenerate, or part of the I don't know what, like the OnlyFans type of West. Like, it's not a false dichotomy. The world does not operate in a false dichotomy the way that Islam presents it to you. And I think if you just showed, or were able to show whoever is that's part of your family, that there's other paths in life, it's not just black and white, obviously without trying to challenge them head on, because this is a very, very sensitive topic, and it is something you have to approach very carefully. And at the end of the day, shaking somebody's entire worldview, again, as circling all the way back, some people, in fact, some of my own cousins I know who are like, they wear hijab, and I sometimes even we joke, and like they say, if I wasn't like probably Muslim or hijabi, I'd be crazy. And I was like, you're crazier than me. So yeah, maybe you would be crazy. Like, I don't know if you need religion at some level. I guess people do. But yeah, sorry, Amon-Ra. I hope that helped.
Thank you. I hope so too. That giving advice in these kind of areas is like
very tricky.
We're not,
yes.
Yeah, I'm not qualified to like give you accurate, maybe suggestions, but please don't take us as some medical professional or like something to diagnose or tell you what you should or shouldn't do in these situations. We don't want to see something go wrong. Mr. Exclusive, thank you for the super chat. This has to be one of the calmest, most educational discussions I have ever heard. My understanding began with studying psychology.
Oh, that is such a sweet super chat. Thank you. Calm, educational. Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm glad we were able to provide that for you, Mr. Exclusive. Thank you.
It can get really tense when you have like, I don't know, friction in those conversations between ideologies and stuff. So Nuri Suna again is back. Thank you again for the super chat. I respectfully understand it may be worrying, but it's a matter of fact that the majority of traditional literature written on the life of Muhammad reflects the later political context of the centuries which followed his life. I actually tend to agree from the academics I've learned from here, not as someone who's studied it himself, but I think that there's good reason to think they crafted their perception of the prophet and many of the stories about him later in their contemporary sensitivities, culture, environment, whatever that may be. So I'm sorry I'm commenting on this before you. I just figure I might as well add my 2 cents is that does this mean we can maybe find less horrific ideas about the actual life of Muhammad that some of the hadiths seem to paint, that we in our modern sensitivities look at anachronistically and say, that's something we should not follow today. At that time, it might have been heroic. It might have been like in their culture, the thing to do or something. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, Derek, first of all, you're equally placed to talk about this, the amount that you've like actually deep dived into this. You remember, I just was like a Muslim and then I left and I was like, oh, I'm done. Like, I don't really like every day go into like, what is this academic saying about Muhammad? You know, like yeah, I've just kind of moved past that. But Nuri Sunnah, you're right. As far as I've tried to like look from let's say the Western or non-Oriental perspective on Muhammad. But there are snippets as well within, I guess, I just turned to Islamic literature for snippets of his life before he became a political leader or before he received his revelation, so to speak. So like questions about his paternal lineage, his maternal lineage, his youth, his adoption, like living with his uncle, all of that. You can kind of see snippets of that in Islamic literature, which is like, don't discount that because that's very damaging too. And it's very insightful. So I would take a bit of both, whatever you're seeing in the traditional literature that's written and what you're seeing from like the Western academics and also what Islam is presenting you, like take it all and then form the picture of what's happening here, is what I would say. But yeah, I think you're right.
Well put. And then Nuri says, by the way, guys and girls, I am by no means arguing that Muhammad wasn't in war. One of my chapters discuss the theological mundane influence which led to them. Thank you so much, Nuri. A couple more here, and then I got to let Nuri go. Ronan of Stag, thank you for doing this today, Derek at MythVision team. Yeah, we are a couple more here. I'll let you definitely go if that's okay with you, Nuri.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I was just gonna tell you in the next few minutes. I'd have to head. Sorry.
Without a doubt, yeah. I'm glad that we're coming up to the end here. Ronan, thanks for that super chat. Nuri says, Stop Scamming Man was referring to the epigraphic evidence inscriptions, which does not at all testify to a presence of idolatry during Muhammad's time. So this gets into the idea, like, is that fictional to act like there's paganism running rampant? And then I think that there's some truth to that they kind of wrote a fictional story. But the idea that there's no pagan, I don't know about that either. I know that there were monks down there were synagogues, there were churches already in Arabia when Muhammad shows up. So are there
and figures of idolatry like they found, but I just don't know the exact datings of them. But like obviously we get the figurines for like the goddesses and stuff, and these sites were obviously like, again, even the Kaabas were like spread all over Arabia, but
right.
They held certain deities. I'm just not up to date with exactly the time frame that you can date the last epigraphic evidence, unfortunately, Nuri. But I'd love to read your book and see what you've got to say.
Thank you. Armando, thank you so much for that. And then last one, Ronan says, Derek, what about having Dr. Justin Sledge on here? I love it. I've had him on 3 times already, and you can just look up MythVision, Dr. Justin Sledge. You'll find that I've interviewed him several times. As we're wrapping up here, Nuri, I noticed that some of the people who are being critical or whatnot may not know, or they just haven't seen some of the videos that I've already done on some of these things. Now, this isn't one of those. I'm just bringing up that some of the critical commenters in the past act like, well, you've never done any videos on Islam without just making it about Christianity or something. And I've done 19 scholarly interviews specifically on Islam. I take critical lens on the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, which is the roots to Judaism. So I don't understand that for some people. Now, I get why someone may have missed interviews with Dr. Justin Sledge. That's reasonable. But anyway, final words from you as I let you go, because you've been a trooper hanging out with me now for 2 hours.
No. It's been amazing as always. Thank you so much to everyone that's been watching, all the support for Derek's channel. Keep it up. And Derek, keep doing what you're doing. I love it. And I'd love to be back soon and have you on my channel as always. I'm back in the game now, so we'll do this again, okay? Yes.
I will be more than happy to join you. So let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye, Derek.
Bye.
Bye.